At Christmas, my mother-in-law proudly introduced a new woman to my husband. I smiled sweetly. By the way, the house is in my name, not his. The room froze. My name is Emily, and until 8 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage to Liam Turner. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 4, and I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful together. How naive I was. The warning signs had been there for months, but I'd attributed them to work stress. Liam worked as a financial advisor at his father's firm, Turner & Associates, while I ran my own successful marketing consultancy from our home office. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in his appearance. I should have connected the dots sooner. It wasn't until I accidentally saw a text notification on his phone while he was in the shower that everything clicked into place. See you tomorrow night. Can't wait to finally meet your family. P says you've told them we're just friends for now. The message was from someone named Lily. My blood ran cold when I realized P meant Helen, his mother. Helen Turner had never liked me. From the moment Liam brought me home to meet his family, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She'd wanted him to marry Chelsea Morrison, the daughter of another wealthy family in their social circle. When Liam chose me instead, a middle-class girl who'd worked her way through college and built her own business, Helen never forgave it either of us. But I never imagined she'd stoop to orchestrating an affair. Over the next 8 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I hired a private investigator named Jason Lee, who confirmed my worst fears. Liam had been seeing Lily Harris for 3 months. She was a 25-year-old real estate agent who'd recently moved to town, and according to Jason's research, Helen had introduced them at a charity gala I'd skipped due to a client emergency. The photos Jason showed me were devastating. Liam and Lily at restaurants I'd never been to, holding hands while walking through the park where he proposed to me, kissing in the parking lot of the gym where we had a joint membership. But the most infuriating part was discovering that Helen was actively encouraging the relationship, even hosting dinner parties where Lily played the role of Liam's girlfriend while I was supposedly away on business trips that didn't actually exist. As heartbroken as I was, I'm also incredibly practical. Instead of confronting Liam immediately, I started planning. My father had taught me chess when I was 7, and his favorite saying was, "Never make a move until you can see the whole board." It was time to study the board very carefully. First, I reviewed every legal document related to our marriage and assets. When we got engaged, my lawyer had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Liam had been offended initially, but I'd explained that, as a business owner, I needed to protect my company and personal assets. The prenup was ironclad. What was mine remained mine, and what was his remained his. More importantly, the house we lived in, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that Helen always bragged about to her friends, was purchased entirely with my money and remained solely in my name. Next, I documented everything. Every business expense Liam had charged to our joint account, every client dinner that was actually a date with Lily, every lie he told me about his whereabouts. I kept our joint accounts active, but started monitoring every transaction in real time through banking apps, screenshotting everything for evidence. I created a detailed spreadsheet that would make any accountant proud. Then I started making strategic moves. I quietly opened new personal accounts and began redirecting my business income there while maintaining just enough in our joint accounts to avoid suspicion. I scheduled a meeting with my divorce attorney, Sophia Diaz, who'd handled my business contracts for years. I updated my will and all my insurance policies. I even had the locks changed on my office space downtown where I'd been considering moving my business full-time. But most importantly, I planned the perfect reveal. Helen had always insisted on hosting elaborate holiday celebrations. Thanksgiving had been uncomfortable with Liam acting distant and Helen making pointed comments about young couples growing apart and finding happiness in unexpected places. But Christmas was her crown jewel event, a formal dinner party for 30 of their closest friends and family members. When Helen called to confirm our attendance, her voice dripped with fake sweetness. "Oh, Emily darling, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a lovely young woman named Lily to join us. She's new in town and doesn't have family nearby. You know how I hate for anyone to be alone during the holidays." I could hear the smugness in her voice, the barely contained excitement. She thought she was cornering me, forcing me to watch my husband's mistress play house at their family celebration. What she didn't realize was that she was giving me the perfect stage for my own performance. The week before Christmas, I went shopping, not for gifts, but for the perfect outfit for the dinner. I chose a stunning red dress that Liam had always loved, paired with a diamond jewelry he'd given me for our anniversary. I wanted to look absolutely radiant when their world came crashing down. I also made one final preparation. I called my brother Jack and my best friend Olivia, asking them to be on standby. I didn't tell them everything, but I hinted that I might need support after Christmas dinner. Both promised to keep their phones close. Christmas Day arrived crisp and clear. Liam was unusually attentive that morning, bringing me coffee in bed and commenting on how beautiful I looked. I wondered if his conscience was bothering him or if Helen had coached him to be extra sweet before they blindsided me with their surprise. We arrived at the Turner family estate at exactly 6:30. The house was decorated like something from a magazine with twinkling lights and perfect garland draped over every surface. Helen greeted us at the door, wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Emily, darling, you look lovely," she said, kissing my cheek with all the warmth of a snake. "Come in. Come in. Everyone's dying to see you both." The living room was filled with the usual suspects. Liam's father, George, his sister, Rachel, and her husband Chris, various aunts, uncles and cousins, and several family friends I'd known for years. But sitting prominently on the sofa next to Helen's usual spot was a young woman I'd never seen in person, though I'd studied enough surveillance photos to recognize her immediately. Lily Harris was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, blonde, and polished to perfection. She wore a cream-colored dress that was clearly expensive but appropriately modest for a family dinner. When she saw Liam, her face lit up in a way that might have been heartbreaking if I hadn't been prepared for it. "Liam," Helen called out. "Come meet Lily. I've told her so much about you." I watched my husband's performance with grudging admiration. He managed to look surprised and pleased while shaking Lily's hand, holding it just a fraction longer than necessary. "Lily, what a pleasure. Mom mentioned you were new in town." "Yes, I moved here from Boston about 8 months ago," Lily replied, her voice warm and friendly. "Your mother has been so welcoming. She's told me wonderful things about the whole family." I stood there smiling, playing the role of the devoted wife. While my marriage disintegrated in front of me, several people tried to include me in the conversation, but I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation in the room. Helen's closest friends, women who'd always treated me with polite disdain, were watching me with barely concealed excitement. Dinner was called at 8 o'clock, and Helen had clearly orchestrated the seating arrangement. Liam was positioned directly across from Lily, with me relegated to the far end of the table between his elderly Uncle Jack and his cousin's wife Karen, who'd always been kind to me. The conversation flowed around topics I'd heard 1,000 times before. George's latest golf tournament, Rachel's children's accomplishments, the family's upcoming vacation to the Bahamas. But I could feel the tension building as Helen kept steering the conversation back to Lily, praising her career, her education, her family background. "Lily graduated from Harvard Business School," Helen announced during the salad course. "Just like our Liam. They have so much in common." "How interesting," I replied smoothly, meeting Lily's eyes across the table. Business school must have been quite an experience. I went straight from undergraduate to starting my own company, so I sometimes wonder what I missed. Lily smiled politely. "Oh, there's nothing wrong with learning through experience. Mom mentioned you have your own marketing firm." "That's right. We specialize in crisis management and reputation recovery. It's amazing how quickly a solid reputation can be destroyed and how much work it takes to rebuild trust once it's broken." Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Helen pressed on. "Lily works in real estate. She's already one of the top agents in her firm." "Real estate can be such a relationship-based business," I observed. "Trust is everything, isn't it? Clients need to know their agent has their best interests at heart, not some hidden agenda." The conversation continued through the main course, with Helen becoming increasingly bold in her praise of Lily, and increasingly pointed in her comments about young people finding their true paths and life taking unexpected turns. During the beef Wellington course, I noticed Lily stealing glances at Liam when she thought no one was looking. There was genuine affection in her eyes, which almost made me feel sorry for her. She had no idea she was being used as a pawn in Helen's chess game, just as much as I was. "Lily, tell us about your family," Helen prompted, clearly steering toward another rehearsed talking point. "I understand your father is in finance as well." "Yes, he's a portfolio manager in Boston," Lily replied, unconsciously straightening her posture. "He actually went to Harvard Business School too, about 20 years before Liam." "Did? How wonderful," Helen exclaimed as if this was the most delightful coincidence in the world. "Liam, didn't you say you were thinking about expanding the firm's investment services?" Liam nodded, playing his part perfectly. "We've been considering it. It would be helpful to have someone with that kind of background on the team." I watched this performance with growing fascination. They clearly planned this conversation, probably rehearsed it multiple times. Helen was systematically establishing Lily's credentials, her family connections, her potential value to the Turner family business. It was like watching a job interview disguised as small talk. "And Lily, you mentioned you're originally from Connecticut?" George asked, seemingly oblivious to his wife's machinations. "That's right, Greenwich. My family has a place on the water there. Nothing too fancy, just a little cottage we've had for generations." I nearly choked on my wine. A little cottage in Greenwich that had been in the family for generations, probably cost more than most people's houses. Helen's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She found herself a daughter-in-law with both money and pedigree. "How lovely," I interjected smoothly. "Greenwich is beautiful. Liam and I looked at properties there when we first got married, but we decided we preferred being closer to the city for work purposes." It was a subtle reminder that Liam and I had made joint decisions about our life together, but I could see Helen filing it away as evidence of my practical, unromantic nature. "Emily's always been very focused on convenience over beauty," Helen said with a tight smile. "It's admirable really how dedicated she is to her work." The backhanded compliment hung in the air like smoke. Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the subtle dig, even if they weren't sure how to respond to it. "I've always believed that loving what you do makes you better at everything else in life," I replied evenly. "When you're fulfilled professionally, you have more energy and enthusiasm to bring to your personal relationships." Lily smiled genuinely at this. "I completely agree. I love real estate because I get to help people find their dream homes. There's something so satisfying about matching the right person with the right property." "How do you determine what makes a property right for someone?" Liam asked, and I could hear the flirtation in his voice, even if others might have missed it. "Well," Lily said, warming to the topic, "you have to really listen to what they're saying, and what they're not saying. Sometimes people think they want one thing, but what they really need is something completely different." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my dessert fork. Lily was unknowingly describing exactly what Helen had done to her, convinced her she wanted Liam when what she really needed was to run as far away from this family as possible. "That sounds like quite a skill," Rachel commented. "I imagine you have to be very perceptive about people's motivations." "You do," Lily agreed. "Unfortunately, not everyone is honest about what they want or what their situation really is. I've had clients lie about their budget, their timeline, even their relationship status. It makes the job much more challenging." Liam went very still at this comment, and I saw Helen's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Lily had just unknowingly described her own situation perfectly. She was being lied to about Liam's relationship status, his timeline, and his true motivations. "Honesty is so important in any relationship," I said, looking directly at Lily. "Professional or personal. Once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild." "Absolutely," Lily said earnestly. "I always tell my clients that we can work through almost any challenge as long as we're honest with each other from the start." The conversation was becoming almost surreal. Lily kept making points that undermined her own position without realizing it. While Liam grew more and more uncomfortable, and Helen worked harder to steer things back to safer topics. "Lily, you must tell us about that lovely property you sold last month," Helen interjected quickly. "The one with the gorgeous gardens." But before Lily could answer, Uncle Jack, who'd been quietly working his way through his third glass of wine, spoke up. "You know, this whole conversation reminds me of when I was in real estate years ago. Had this client once who was married, but told everyone he was single. Caused quite a mess when the truth came out." The table fell silent except for the soft clink of silverware against china. Jack, bless his heart, continued obliviously. "Fellow thought he was being clever, keeping his wife in the dark while he shopped for a love nest with his girlfriend. But the girlfriend found out about the wife. The wife found out about the girlfriend, and both women ended up owning pieces of him in the divorce settlement." Helen, clearly embarrassed, said sharply, "Perhaps we should discuss something more pleasant." "Oh, it turned out quite pleasant in the end," Jack continued cheerfully. "The wife took him for everything he was worth. The girlfriend realized she'd dodged a bullet, and both women ended up much happier without him. Funny how these things work out sometimes." I raised my wineglass slightly in Jack's direction. "To justice being served," I said quietly, but not so quietly that the table couldn't hear me. Lily was looking increasingly uncomfortable, though I wasn't sure if she understood why Jack's story was relevant. Liam, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Well," Helen said brightly, clearly desperate to change the subject. "Shall we move on to dessert?" I made my famous chocolate torte. As Helen bustled around serving dessert, I caught Karen, the cousin's wife, beside me, giving me a meaningful look. She leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay, honey? You seem a little tense tonight." I smiled at her gratefully. Karen had always been observant and kind, never part of Helen's inner circle, but always trying to smooth over family tensions. "I'm fine," I whispered back, just enjoying the family dynamics. Karen studied my face for a moment, then glanced around the table. I could see understanding dawning in her eyes as she took in Helen's obvious matchmaking efforts, Liam's discomfort, and Lily's innocent participation in what was clearly a setup. "Oh my," Karen breathed quietly. "Emily, do you need?" "I've got it handled," I assured her softly. "But thank you." Karen squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt a surge of gratitude for her kindness. It reminded me that not everyone in this family was complicit in Helen's schemes. The chocolate torte was admittedly delicious. Helen might be a master manipulator, but she was also an excellent cook. I found myself savoring each bite, knowing it would likely be the last time I'd taste her famous dessert. "This is incredible, Mrs. Turner," Lily said enthusiastically. "Would you be willing to share the recipe?" "Oh, it's a family recipe," Helen replied with false modesty. "I only share it with family members." The implication was clear. Once Lily married Liam and I was out of the picture, she'd be worthy of the precious torte recipe. It was such a petty little power play, but it perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with Helen's worldview. "That's a shame," I said conversationally. "I've been asking for that recipe for 8 years. I guess I never quite made it into the inner circle." The comment was light enough to seem like a joke, but pointed enough to make several people uncomfortable. Rachel looked mortified. George frowned at his wife, and even Lily seemed to sense the underlying tension. "Emily, you know that's not—" Helen started. But I held up my hand. "It's fine, Helen. I understand. Some things are reserved for blood relatives and future daughters-in-law." The emphasis on future was subtle but unmistakable. Lily looked confused, glancing between Helen and me as if trying to understand why a recipe was causing such tension. It was then, as I watched Lily's genuine bewilderment and saw Helen's satisfied smirk, that I realized the full extent of the cruelty in this situation. Helen wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was using Lily to do it, all while keeping Lily in the dark about her true role in the scheme. Lily thought she was at a family dinner making friends. She had no idea she was the weapon Helen was wielding against me. That realization crystallized my resolve. When Helen made her grand announcement, I would make sure Lily understood exactly how she'd been used, not to hurt her, but to free her from Helen's manipulation. It was during dessert that Helen finally made her move. "This is Lily," Helen announced proudly, raising her wine glass and gesturing toward the blonde beside her. "She'll be perfect for Liam after the divorce." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Every conversation stopped. Uncle Jack nearly dropped his fork. Rachel gasped audibly. Even George, who'd clearly not been informed of his wife's plan, looked stunned. But I was ready. I calmly buttered my roll, taking my time to spread it evenly, while every eye in the room focused on me. Then I looked up with my brightest smile. "How nice," I said sweetly, turning to Lily. "Did they mention that the house Liam and I live in is in my name, and that there's a prenup in place protecting every single asset that matters?" Liam went completely still, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, his face draining of color as he realized the trap they'd walked into. Lily's confident smile faltered as she looked between Helen and Liam, confusion replacing her earlier composure. But I wasn't done. "I'm curious, Lily," I continued, my voice conversational and friendly. "When exactly did you and Liam start your relationship? Was it before or after the charity gala in June where Helen introduced you?" The color drained from Lily's face. I'm not sure what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts like the fact that you've been seeing my husband for 3 months, or that you've been to dinner at Marcello's 7 times together. They have excellent security cameras, by the way. Or that Helen has been hosting cozy little dinner parties where you play house while I'm supposedly out of town." Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Emily, I don't know what you think you know, but what I know," I interrupted, reaching into my purse and pulling out a manila folder, "is that I have a private investigator who's very thorough in his work. Would you like to see the photos, Helen? Or should I just tell everyone about the time you told Lily that once Liam divorced me, she'd be living in the big house and wouldn't have to worry about money anymore?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft clink of ice in someone's water glass, the barely audible gasp from Rachel. Liam finally found his voice. "Emily, please. Let's not do this here. Why not here? I asked, genuinely curious. This is where your mother chose to humiliate me in front of your entire family. This is where she thought she'd force me to sit quietly while she introduced your replacement. So this seems like the perfect place to set the record straight. I stood up, smoothing my red dress, and addressed the room like I was giving a business presentation. For those of you who are wondering, yes, Liam has been having an affair. Yes, Helen orchestrated it. And yes, they've been planning to divorce me so Liam can marry Lily and live in what Helen calls the big house. I turned back to Lily, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The thing is, Lily, that big house, I bought it with my money before Liam and I got married. And according to our prenuptial agreement, it remains mine regardless of what happens to our marriage. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Liam told me you were separated. He said you were just waiting to make it official after the holidays. Did he also tell you about the joint account he's been using to pay for your dates? The one that I've been monitoring every transaction, or that the business trips I've been taking that gave you time alone were fictional? Liam stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough, Emily. Is it? I asked. Because I don't think I've covered everything yet. Should I mention that you've been telling Lily I'm emotionally distant and we haven't been intimate in months? Because that's interesting considering we were together 2 nights ago. Lily made us sound like a wounded animal and looked at Liam with betrayal in her eyes. You said you were sleeping in the guest room. You said you hadn't. That you two weren't. He lied, I said simply. About a lot of things. It turns out Helen finally found her voice again. But it came out as a screech. How dare you come into my home and make these accusations? Liam deserves better than someone who cares more about business than her own marriage. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Liam does deserve better. He deserves someone who's honest with him. Someone who doesn't orchestrate affairs behind his back. Someone who doesn't manipulate him into betraying his wife. I looked around the room at the shocked faces of people who had known me for 7 years. For those of you who are wondering what happens now, I've already prepared divorce papers. They'll be filed tomorrow morning, but I wanted everyone to know the truth first. Marie, the cousin's wife beside me, reached over and squeezed my hand. Emily, honey, I'm so sorry. Thank you, I said genuinely. I appreciate that, and I want everyone to know that this wasn't a decision I made lightly. I tried to save my marriage. I tried to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a wife. I looked directly at Liam, who was staring at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. But then I realized I hadn't failed at anything. I'd been loyal, supportive, and loving for 7 years. I built a successful business while supporting my husband's career. And I tried to build relationships with his family, even when they made it clear I wasn't welcome. Helen started to object, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. You see, the thing about having your own business in crisis management is that you learn to plan for every contingency. So, while Liam was planning his new life with Lily, I was planning to. I reached into my folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are copies of every transaction Liam made using our joint accounts for his dates with Lily. Restaurants, gifts, even the hotel room you two used last weekend while I was supposedly visiting my sister. Lily buried her face in her hands. Liam looked like he was going to be sick. The total comes to $12,000 over 3 months, I continued, which according to our prenup constitutes financial infidelity and gives me grounds to pursue additional damages. George finally spoke up, his voice gruff with embarrassment. Emily, perhaps we should discuss this privately. With respect, George, there's nothing private about it anymore. Your wife made sure of that when she invited Lily to publicly humiliate me. I turned to Lily one final time. I don't blame you entirely, Lily. Liam is very charming when he wants to be, and Helen can be very convincing, but you should know that the man you thought you were in love with has been lying to both of us. Lily looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I really thought Liam said, you two were already separated. She showed me pictures of Liam looking miserable and said, you were cold and career-obsessed. I'm sure she did, I replied gently. Helen's never approved of me. But Lily, think about this. If Liam was willing to lie to me for 5 months, if he was willing to use our joint money to wine and dine you, if he was willing to let his mother orchestrate an affair rather than having an honest conversation with his wife about problems in our marriage, what does that tell you about his character? The room was so quiet I could hear the furnace kicking on in the basement. Finally Rachel broke the silence. Emily, I don't know what to say. I had no idea any of this was happening. I know, I said, my voice softer now. Most of you didn't. And I don't hold that against anyone. But I needed you all to know the truth before you started hearing Helen's version of events. I gathered my purse and my folder, preparing to leave. The divorce will be final in 2 months. Liam can stay in the house until then, but after that, he'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'll be moving my business to my downtown office full-time, so I won't be working from home anymore. Liam finally looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with. Emily, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try to work it out? Work what out? I asked. Liam, the lies, the cheating. The fact that your mother has been actively sabotaging our marriage for 5 months while you went along with it. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. Actually, don't answer that because here's what I've realized over the past few weeks. I don't want to work it out. I don't want to be married to someone who solves problems by having affairs. I don't want to be part of a family that thinks humiliation is an acceptable form of entertainment. I looked around the room one last time. To those of you who've been kind to me over the years, thank you. I'll miss you. To those of you who haven't, well, I won't. As I headed toward the door, Lily called out behind me. Emily, wait. I turned back to see her standing, her face pale but determined. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never would have if I'd known he was lying. I believe you, I said honestly. But Lily, you need to ask yourself why Helen was so eager to break up her son's marriage. And you need to ask Liam why he was so willing to let her do it. Helen stood up then, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You self-righteous little. George's voice cut through his wife's rage like a knife. Sit down. You've done enough. I smiled at George, a man who had always been kind to me despite his wife's attitude. Thank you for 7 years of kindness, George. I'll always be grateful for that. And then I walked out of the Turner family home for the last time. The next morning my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Lily. Emily, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from... Well, Liam had it in his phone. It's fine, I said, surprised by the call. What can I do for you? I ended it, she said simply. Last night after you left. I told Liam I couldn't be with someone who could lie so easily to someone he claimed to love. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I know you cared about him. I thought I did. But you were right. If he could lie to you for 5 months, what was he doing to me? And Helen? Lily's voice trailed off. What about Helen? She called me last night after I got home. She was furious that I'd ruined everything by ending it with Liam. She said I was just like you, too independent and too difficult. She said I'd never find another man as good as Liam. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, that's Helen for you. The thing is, Lily continued. I realized something while she was screaming at me. She didn't care about Liam's happiness or mine. She just wanted to win. She wanted to prove she could break up your marriage and control her son's life. That's exactly right, I confirmed. I was never the problem, Lily. You wouldn't have been the solution. Helen just wanted to be in charge. We talked for another 15 minutes. Lily told me she was considering moving back to Boston, that the whole experience had left her feeling manipulated and used. I found myself giving her advice about trusting her instincts and not letting other people define her worth. It was strange bonding with my husband's mistress over how we'd both been manipulated by his mother. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, exactly as Sofia Diaz had predicted. Liam didn't contest anything, probably because he knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. The house remained mine along with my business and all my personal assets. Liam kept his share of our joint savings and his own belongings. 2 months later, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She looked embarrassed when she saw me, but I smiled and approached her anyway. How are you doing, Rachel? I'm so sorry, Emily, about everything. About Christmas dinner, about Mom, about Liam. I had no idea. I know you didn't. How is Liam? She sighed. He moved in with Mom and Dad temporarily. He's been pretty miserable, actually. I think he's starting to realize what he lost. And Helen? Rachel actually laughed, though it sounded pained. She's been telling everyone who will listen that you trapped Liam with a prenup and that you seduced him away from his true love. Most people aren't buying it, especially after Lily left town and told her side of the story to several mutual friends. Lily left? Yeah, about a month ago. But before she did, she had lunch with several of the women who were at Christmas dinner. She told them everything. How Mom had manipulated her. how Liam had lied to her, how she felt used by both of them. I felt a surge of pride for Lily. It took courage to admit you'd been fooled and even more courage to set the record straight. I'm glad she found her voice, I said. Emily, Rachel said hesitantly. I know this is probably too late, but I want you to know that some of us never agreed with how Mom treated you. We didn't know how to stand up to her without causing a family war. I understand, I said, and I did. Helen was a formidable woman who'd ruled her family through manipulation and emotional blackmail for decades. But maybe it's time someone did cause a war. Rachel smiled ruefully. Actually, Dad's been giving her a pretty hard time about the whole thing. He was mortified by her behavior at Christmas dinner. They're in marriage counseling now. 6 months after the divorce was final, I received an unexpected visitor at my downtown office. Liam stood in my waiting room looking older and tired, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I know I don't have the right to be here, he said when my assistant showed him into my office. But I needed to apologize. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Okay, I'm listening. He sat down heavily and placed the flowers on my desk. I've been going to therapy. Individual therapy, not the couples counseling Mom suggested. And I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I did to you, to us. And what conclusion did you reach? That I'm a coward. He said simply. That I let my mother manipulate me into destroying the best thing that ever happened to me. That I was too weak to stand up to her and too selfish to be honest with you. I studied his face, looking for signs of a man I'd once loved. Why, Liam? Why didn't you just talk to me if you were unhappy? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from 100 arguments. Because I wasn't unhappy with you. I was unhappy with myself, with my job, with feeling like I was living in your shadow, with never being able to measure up to your success. So, you had an affair. So, I had an affair. He agreed miserably. And I let Mom convince me it was your fault for being too ambitious, too independent, too focused on work. But none of that was true. No, it wasn't. It was all projection. I was the one who was too focused on work, on trying to prove myself to Dad, on trying to make enough money to feel like I deserved you. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally I spoke. I would have supported you if you'd wanted to change careers. You know, if you'd wanted to do something that made you happier. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. But at the time, I couldn't see past my own insecurities, and Mom was so good at feeding them, at making me feel justified in my resentment. What do you want from me, Liam? Forgiveness, closure, a second chance. He looked up at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes. I want you to know that I know what I lost. I want you to know that Lily wasn't better than you. No one could be better than you. I want you to know that the biggest mistake of my life wasn't the affair, it was not appreciating what I had when I had it. And I want you to be happy. Really happy with someone who deserves you. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Thank you, I said finally. I appreciate you coming here and saying that. He nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Emily, you were magnificent that night at Christmas dinner. I've never seen anyone handle themselves with such grace under pressure. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and closure and the strange way life sometimes comes full circle. A year later I was dating a wonderful man named Daniel Parker. Jason is the private investigator's brother. As it turned out, Daniel was a pediatric surgeon who found my independence attractive rather than threatening, who supported my business ambitions, and who thought my story about Christmas dinner was hilarious rather than embarrassing. We were having dinner at Romano's, the same restaurant where I confronted the evidence of Liam's betrayal when Daniel asked me if I ever regretted how I'd handled the situation. Do you mean, do I regret planning it out instead of just screaming and throwing things? I asked. I mean, do you regret exposing everything in front of his whole family instead of handling it privately? I considered the question seriously. No, I said finally. Helen chose to humiliate me publicly. She thought she could corner me, embarrass me, and force me to accept her son's infidelity quietly. She thought I was weak, and you proved her wrong. I proved that actions have consequences, that manipulating people's lives for sport comes with a price, that underestimating someone because you think they're beneath you is a dangerous game. Daniel smiled and raised his wine glass. To dangerous women and the men smart enough to appreciate them. To second chances, I countered, clinking my glass against his. and to the wisdom to know when someone deserves one. As we left the restaurant that night, I thought about Lily, who'd moved back to Boston and was reportedly doing well in commercial real estate. I thought about Liam, who'd left his father's firm to teach high school math and seemed genuinely happier. I thought about Helen, who'd lost her position as the family matriarch after her behavior at Christmas dinner had finally convinced George to demand change. But mostly, I thought about myself, about the woman who'd sat at that dinner table a year ago, calmly buttering her roll while her world exploded around her. She'd been strong, strategic, and ultimately victorious. She'd also been absolutely terrified. The truth was, walking away from a 7-year marriage, even a broken one, had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. Standing up to Helen in front of all those people had taken every ounce of courage I possessed. Planning my revenge had been empowering, but executing it had been terrifying. But sometimes being terrified is exactly what you need to discover how strong you really are. And sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting out.